The transport ship Meridian's Edge descended through the crystalline atmosphere of Nexus Prime, its hull gleaming against the backdrop of 7 different suns. Through the viewport, pressed her face against the cool metal, watching as the most prestigious military academy in known space came into view. The Galactic Defense Institute stood like a massive spear thrust into the planet's surface, its towers stretching impossibly high into the thin atmosphere. "First time seeing the Institute?" asked the sitting beside her, his blue-scaled skin shimmering with nervous energy. "I'm Val from the Hegemony." Turned to study him. Like most of his species, Val stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and eyes that could see across multiple light spectrums. His people were known throughout the galaxy as master strategists and had been members of the Galactic Alliance for over 3 centuries. "From Earth," she replied simply. The change in the transport's atmosphere was immediate. Conversations that had been flowing in dozens of different languages suddenly stopped. Every being on the ship turned to stare at the small human female who had just announced her origins. "Earth," the voice came from somewhere behind her, dripping with disbelief. "You mean the quarantine world?" Didn't turn around. She'd heard this reaction countless times during her journey to Nexus Prime. Earth was indeed under galactic quarantine, had been for the past 50 years. Her planet was considered too dangerous, too unpredictable, its inhabitants too violent for integration into civilized galactic society. "How did you even get here?" This time the question came from one of the species known for their logical minds and peaceful nature. "Humans aren't allowed off their world." "Special circumstances," said, finally turning to face the crowd of alien cadets. The transport held representatives from 47 different species, all the galaxy's best, and all headed to the Institute to train as the next generation of galactic defenders. And now they were all staring at her like she was a bomb about to explode. The Whose Name Tag Red Hive Singer clicked his mandibles nervously. "But humans are. I mean, your species is classified as. The Alliance Council determined that human aggression levels were incompatible with civilized space." "Is it true what they say about your people?" asked a crystalline being from the Silicon Confederacy. "That you wage war on your own species, that you've weaponized everything on your planet, even your food?" Sighed, the legends about humanity had grown in the 50 years since the quarantine. Some were true, some were wildly exaggerated, and some were completely made up. But they all painted the same picture: humans as bloodthirsty monsters who solved every problem with violence. "We're not monsters," she said quietly. "We're just different." "Different enough to be banned from the galaxy," muttered someone from the back. The transport's pilot, a professional with 4 eyes and silver skin, announced their approach to the landing platform. As they descended, got her first clear view of the Institute's main campus. It was enormous, stretching across several continents. The architecture was a blend of styles from hundreds of different worlds, creating something both alien and beautiful. "The Galactic Defense Institute," the pilot announced over the comm system, "home to the finest military minds in the known galaxy. Here you will train alongside the best of the best, learning to defend the Alliance against external threats and internal discord." As they disembarked, found herself walking behind a group of cadets. There were tall, elegant beings with translucent skin and natural telepathic abilities. They were considered the most culturally advanced species in the galaxy, known for their philosophy and art as much as their military prowess. "I still can't believe they let a human in," one of them was saying, not bothering to lower his voice. "My father sits on the Academy board. He said it took a direct intervention from the High Council to override the species' restrictions." "What could be so special about one human that the High Council would risk it?" his companion replied. Kept walking, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Around her, other cadets were being greeted by floating luggage bots and personal attendants. Some had brought enough belongings to stock a small ship. She had brought one change of clothes and her grandmother's combat knife, hidden in a shielded compartment. The main reception hall was a soaring cathedral of glass and metal, with holographic displays showing the Institute's proud history. Battles won, alliances forged, peace maintained across 1,000 worlds. At the center of the hall stood a massive statue of the first Alliance Supreme Commander, a named High Singer Vex who had united the major species against the Void War 3 centuries ago. "Attention, new cadets!" The voice boomed across the hall, enhanced by acoustic dampeners that made it audible to every species present. Welcome to the Galactic Defense Institute. I am Commandant Therazine, and for the next 4 years, this institution will forge you into the defenders our galaxy needs. Commandant Therazine was one of the artificial beings created by the long-extinct builder species. His body was a masterwork of engineering, standing 12 feet tall with 4 arms and a head that could rotate completely around. Red optical sensors scanned the crowd as he spoke. You represent the finest minds and warriors from 47 different worlds. Each of you has exceeded the expectations of your species. Each of you has demonstrated the potential to serve the Alliance with honor and distinction. His sensors stopped on, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. Some of you may be wondering about our unusual circumstances this year. Yes, we have accepted a cadet from a quarantined world. This decision was not made lightly, and it comes with the full backing of the High Council. The murmur that ran through the crowd was like the buzz of an angry hive. Dozens of different species expressed their displeasure in dozens of different ways. The cadet in question has demonstrated exceptional abilities that warrant this exception. She will be treated like any other cadet, held to the same standards, given the same opportunities. Felt hundreds of eyes on her, and not all of them were friendly. She kept her expression neutral, a skill she'd learned early in life. You will now be sorted into your training companies. Each company consists of 12 cadets from different species backgrounds. You will live together, train together, and learn to function as a unified force. Holographic displays around the hall began showing company assignments. Found her name listed under Company 7, along with 11 other names she didn't recognize. As she made her way to the designated meeting area, she noticed that several other cadets were giving her a wide berth. Company 7's meeting area was near one of the large windows overlooking the training grounds. As approached, she could see her new teammates already gathering. There was Val from the transport, looking nervous but determined. A towering Goliath-class warrior named Stonebreaker, whose people were known for their incredible strength and unshakable loyalty. A sleek Phantom-class infiltrator called Shadowwalker Nyx, whose species could become nearly invisible at will. "So you're the human," said a voice behind her. Turned to see a being she didn't immediately recognize, tall and lean with silver skin and eyes like molten gold. "I'm Captain Select from the Nova Confederacy. I've heard stories about your kind." "Most of them are probably wrong," replied. "Are they?" Studied her with obvious interest. "They say humans can enter a berserker state where they feel no pain and fight until they die. They say your species practices something called total war, where you destroy everything, even your own resources, to defeat an enemy." "We call it determination," said. "And it's not always about fighting. Sometimes it's about surviving when survival seems impossible." "Interesting," smiled, though on his alien features it looked more predatory than friendly. "I look forward to seeing this determination in action." The rest of Company 7 gradually assembled. There was Echo Dancer Lyra from the Harmony Collective, whose people communicated through complex musical patterns. Binary Thought from the Logic Consortium, a being of pure mathematical consciousness inhabiting a crystalline matrix. Windrider Talon from the Storm Worlds, with feathered wings and talons that could tear through steel. As they introduced themselves, began to understand the scale of what she was facing. Each of her companions represented the absolute pinnacle of their species' abilities. Val wasn't just he was from a bloodline of legendary military commanders. Stonebreaker had personally held off an entire pirate fleet to protect a refugee convoy. Shadowwalker Nyx had infiltrated and dismantled 3 different criminal organizations before her 18th birthday. And then there was her, a human from a quarantined world with no obvious special abilities, no legendary bloodline, no heroic achievements that anyone knew about. "Right," said a new voice, crisp and authoritative. "Company 7, attention." They turned to see their assigned instructor approaching. She was one of the plant-based species known for their patience and wisdom. Her name tag identified her as Senior Instructor Blue Maternal, and her bark-like skin showed the intricate patterns that indicated centuries of experience. "I am your primary combat instructor. For the next 4 years, I will be responsible for turning you from a collection of individuals into a functional military unit." Her photosynthetic fronds rustled as she spoke, a sign of either amusement or irritation. "I have been informed that this year's Company 7 presents unique challenges." Her gaze settled on. "Cadet, you are undoubtedly aware that your presence here is controversial." Many believe that humans lack the emotional control necessary for civilized warfare. They point to your species' history of conflict as evidence that you cannot be trusted with advanced military training. Nodded, she'd heard these arguments countless times during the application process. However, instructor continued, the High Council believes otherwise. They have seen something in your psychological profiles that suggests potential for greatness. My job is to help you realize that potential, while ensuring that your teammates learn to work with someone whose tactical thinking may be unconventional. She addressed the entire group. You will be living in shared quarters in Tower 7. Each of you has been assigned a private room, but you will share common areas, training facilities, and dining arrangements. I suggest you use this time to learn about each other's cultures and capabilities. As they were dismissed to find their quarters, found herself walking beside Shadow Walker Nyx. The Phantom class being moved with fluid grace, her dark skin seeming to bend light around her. You know, Nyx said, her voice a barely audible whisper, I've studied human military history. Your species has some interesting tactics. Such as Pyrrhic victories, kamikaze attacks, scorched earth policies. Your people have a talent for winning battles by being willing to pay prices that no rational species would consider. Is that what you think I am? Asked, irrational. Nyx was quiet for a moment. I think you're something none of us have encountered before, and that makes you either very dangerous or very valuable. Their quarters were located on the 43rd floor of Tower 7, with a spectacular view of the training grounds and the cityscape beyond. This room was furnished but comfortable, with a bed designed for human physiology and a small desk overlooking the grounds. As she unpacked her single bag, she could hear her teammates moving around in the adjacent rooms. The walls were thin enough that she could make out some of their conversations, though much of it was in languages she didn't understand. Her grandmother's combat knife went into a locked drawer, where it would stay hidden until she needed it. The blade was made of Damascus steel, forged by her grandmother during the resource wars that had devastated Earth 50 years ago. It was one of the few things she had left of her family, and it served as a reminder of where she came from. A soft chime indicated an incoming message on her personal communicator. The holographic display showed the face of Director Sarah, her handler from Earth's Planetary Defense Administration. I hope you're settling in well. I wanted to remind you that you're not just representing yourself at the Institute. You're representing all of humanity. This is our chance to prove that we belong among the galactic community. The message continued for several minutes, covering security protocols, communication schedules, and various bureaucratic details. But the core message was simple: don't screw this up. As evening fell, Company 7 gathered in their shared common area for dinner. The food was a carefully balanced selection designed to meet the nutritional needs of all 12 species represented. For that meant something resembling synthesized protein with vegetables, bland but nutritious. So human, said Binary Thought, his crystalline matrix pulsing with calculated light patterns. I have been analyzing your species' military performance over the past millennium. Your win-loss ratio is surprisingly high, considering your technological limitations. We make do with what we have, replied. But how? This question came from Windrider Talon, whose people were born warriors with natural flight and enhanced reflexes. My species has been studying warfare for 10,000 years, and we've never encountered tactical approaches like yours. Set down her fork and considered her answer carefully. Most species fight to win, humans fight to survive. There's a difference. Elaborate, commanded Captain Select. When you fight to win, you calculate acceptable losses, optimal strategies, resource allocation. You make rational decisions based on probable outcomes. Gestured around the table. All of your species are good at this. You're logical, strategic, efficient. And humans are not, asked Val. Humans fight like cornered animals sometimes. We don't always make the rational choice. We make the choice that keeps us alive, even if it's stupid, even if it costs everything else. Stonebreaker leaned forward, his massive frame creaking the reinforced chair. This sounds like poor tactical thinking. Maybe, but it also means we don't give up when rational analysis says we should. We keep fighting when any logical species would surrender. Echo dancer Lyra produced a complex musical phrase that her translator rendered as, this suggests either admirable determination or dangerous irrationality. Both probably admitted. The conversation continued for another hour, with each species sharing aspects of their military philosophy. The emphasized strategic thinking and long-term planning. The Goliath-class warriors focused on honor and personal strength. The discussed patience and sustainable conflict resolution. As the group began to disperse, Shadow Walker Nyx approached privately. "There's something you should know," she said, her voice pitched so low that only could hear it. "Some of the other companies are not happy about your presence here. They're planning to test you." "Test me how?" "Nothing official, but the Institute has a tradition of informal challenges between companies. Usually it's friendly competition. But with you here," Nyx shrugged, a gesture that made her seem to flicker between visibility and invisibility. "They want to prove that humans don't belong here." Nodded, she'd expected something like this. Any idea what kind of challenge? "Probably combat trials. The Institute allows controlled sparring matches between cadets as part of training. If they challenge Company 7 to a formal contest, we'll have to accept or lose face." "And you think they'll target me specifically?" "I think they'll try to make an example of you. Show everyone that the legendary human aggression is just primitive violence." That night, as lay in her narrow bed listening to the alien sounds of the Institute settling into its nocturnal cycle, she thought about everything that had brought her to this point. The decades of quarantine that had isolated Earth from the galaxy. The careful negotiations that had led to her acceptance. The expectations of an entire planet resting on her shoulders. She thought about her grandmother, who had fought in the resource wars when most of the world's governments had collapsed. Who had survived when billions hadn't. Who had taught that survival wasn't about being the strongest but about being the one who refused to quit. Tomorrow, her real training would begin. Tomorrow, she would start proving that humanity deserved a place among the stars. Outside her window, the lights of Nexus Prime stretched to the horizon, a city that housed beings from across the galaxy. Somewhere out there were species that saw humans as monsters, others that saw them as curiosities, and a few that might see them as potential allies. Her communicator chimed softly with another message, this one from her roommate back on Earth. "Hope you're doing okay out there. Remember, you're not just representing Earth. You're carrying all our hopes with you." Smiled grimly and closed her eyes. No pressure at all. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of orientation sessions, academic placements, and introductory training. The Institute operated on a complex schedule designed to accommodate the different biological rhythms of its diverse student body. Some species were naturally nocturnal, others required specific atmospheric conditions, and a few needed regular exposure to specific types of radiation. Found herself assigned to the standard gravity oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere track, which accommodated about 60% of the student body. Her academic schedule included universal military history, xenobiology and tactical applications, advanced weapons systems, and strategic communications. The professors were as diverse as the students, representing dozens of different species and military traditions. Professor Hivemind Collective Delta taught universal military history as an interconnected narrative spanning millions of years and thousands of different civilizations. Commander Scale Singer, a reptilian saurian, covered weapons systems with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved explosive ordnance. But it was during her first strategic communications class that encountered her first real challenge. The professor was a tall, elegant ethereal named Thought Weaver, whose people were natural telepaths with an innate understanding of psychological warfare. The class was held in an amphitheater that could accommodate beings of various sizes, with translation systems that converted complex telepathic concepts into audible language. "Strategic communications," Professor began, her mental voice carried through the translation system with ethereal harmonics, "is the art of conveying information, misinformation, and intent across species barriers. In modern warfare, victory often goes not to the side with superior firepower, but to the side that better understands their enemy's psychological framework." She gestured to the holographic display at the center of the amphitheater, which showed a three-dimensional map of galactic civilizations. Each species processes information differently. The logical consortium makes decisions based purely on mathematical probability. The Harmony Collective seeks consensus among all members before acting. The Storm Worlds respond to challenges with immediate aggression. Her attention settled on, and even through the translation systems, the intensity of her telepathic focus was noticeable. Cadet, perhaps you could enlighten us about human psychological frameworks. Every head in the amphitheater turned toward. She could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of curiosity and skepticism that had followed her since her arrival. Humans are complicated, she said finally. We don't fit neatly into most psychological categories. Elaborate. Stood up, following the protocol she'd observed other cadets using. Most species seem to have consistent psychological patterns. You can predict how they'll respond to specific stimuli. Humans are less predictable. Chaos entities, muttered someone from the back of the amphitheater. Professor's telepathic attention sharpened. Continue, cadet. Humans can be logical when they need to be, emotional when logic isn't enough, aggressive when threatened, and cooperative when working toward common goals. We adapt our psychological approach based on circumstances. This suggests either remarkable flexibility or dangerous instability, the professor observed. Maybe both, admitted. But it also means you can't defeat us just by understanding our psychology, because we might change it depending on what we're facing. A ripple of unease went through the amphitheater. Several cadets exchanged glances, and could see them filing this information away for future reference. After class, as cadets filed out discussing the lesson, found herself approached by a being she hadn't seen before. He was tall and powerfully built, with the characteristic metallic skin and glowing eyes of the Titan Collective. His name tag identified him as Warforged Company 3. Human, he said, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance typical of his species. I am curious about your claims regarding psychological adaptability. What about them? The Titan Collective has studied human military history extensively since your quarantine began. We find your tactics unorthodox. Unorthodox how? His glowing eyes seemed to brighten. Your species employs strategies that should not work according to established military doctrine. Pyrrhic victories where you accept catastrophic losses to achieve minimal gains. Berserker charges that abandon all defensive positioning. Kamikaze attacks that deliberately sacrifice resources. Sometimes those are the only options available, replied. But they violate basic strategic principles. No rational commander would order such actions. Maybe rationality is overrated. The conversation was drawing attention from other cadets, who slowed their departure to listen. Could see representatives from at least 6 different companies gathering around them. This is precisely the concern many of us have, said a new voice. Turned to see Captain Select approaching, flanked by 2 other cadets she didn't recognize. Human tactical thinking appears to be fundamentally chaotic. Chaotic or just different? Asked. Is there a difference? This question came from a cadet whose telepathic abilities were immediately apparent from the faint glow around his translucent skin. Military effectiveness requires predictability, coordination, strategic thinking, if your species cannot be relied upon to make rational decisions. Then maybe, interrupted a familiar voice, you should stop making assumptions about what we can or cannot do. Turned to see Shadow Walker Nyx approaching, moving with the fluid grace that made her people such effective infiltrators. Behind her came the rest of Company 7, apparently having heard the commotion. Is there a problem here? Asked Stonebreaker, his massive frame filling the corridor. When a Goliath-class warrior asked if there was a problem, most species took it seriously. No problem, said Warforged, though his tone suggested otherwise. We were simply discussing military philosophy with our human classmate. Academic discussion, added smoothly, though perhaps the human would be willing to demonstrate these unconventional tactics she speaks of. The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. Around them, the gathering crowd of cadets seemed to sense the shift in tension. Demonstrate how? Asked. The Institute allows formal sparring matches between companies, explained. It's considered an important part of military training. Perhaps Company 7 would be willing to accept a challenge. Looked around at her teammates. Val's forearms were twitching with nervous energy. Echo dancer Lyra was producing barely audible musical tones that suggested anxiety. Windrider Talon's wings were partially extended, ready for flight or fight. What kind of sparring match? Asked Binary Thought, his crystalline matrix pulsing with rapid calculations. Standard combat trials, replied. 12 versus 12 using practice weapons and protective gear, non-lethal but realistic enough to demonstrate tactical effectiveness. And if we refuse, asked Shadow Walker Nix, then everyone will know that Company 7 lacks the courage to back up their claims, said the cadet. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Refusing the challenge would mark Company 7 as cowards, which would make their time at the Institute significantly more difficult. But accepting meant going up against cadets who had been training for this their entire lives, using weapons and tactics had never encountered. We'll need time to discuss it, said Val diplomatically. Of course, said, but don't take too long. The entire Institute is already talking about this. As the other companies dispersed, Company 7 found themselves alone in the corridor. The weight of the decision hung over them like a storm cloud. Well, said Windrider Talon, this is exactly what we wanted, a chance to prove ourselves in front of the entire Academy. Against opponents who have been training for this their entire lives, Val pointed out. Using weapons and tactics we've never encountered, added Echo Dancer Lyra. In a combat system designed by and for non-human species, Binary Thought calculated. They all looked at. It's your choice, said Shadow Walker Nix. This challenge is really about you, not the rest of us. Thought about her grandmother, who had faced impossible odds during the resource wars and somehow survived. About the billions of humans back on Earth who were depending on her to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. About the expectations and prejudices that had followed her since her arrival. We accept, she said. The news spread through the Institute like wildfire. By dinner time, every cadet in the Academy knew about the upcoming combat trial between Company 7 and a coalition of cadets from Companies 3, 5, and 9. The betting pools were already active, with odds heavily favoring the coalition. Senior Instructor Blue Maternal found Company 7 in their common area that evening, her photosynthetic fronds rustling with what might have been amusement or concern. I understand you've accepted a combat challenge, she said without preamble. We have, replied. Against 36 opponents. Wait, what? Val's forearms flailed in alarm. They said 12 versus 12. The challenge has been modified, Instructor explained. Companies 3, 5, and 9 have formed a temporary alliance. The rules allow for multi-company coalitions in formal challenges. The weight of this new information settled over Company 7 like a lead blanket. Bad enough to face 12 trained opponents, but 36. This is ridiculous, said Stonebreaker. No one expects us to fight 3-to-1 odds. Actually, Instructor said, several members of the Academy faculty are quite interested to see how you handle the situation. Combat challenges are considered important learning experiences. Learning experiences for whom? Asked Windrider Talon. For everyone involved. The coalition gets to test their coordination against an unpredictable opponent. Company 7 gets to demonstrate whether human tactical thinking can overcome overwhelming odds. She paused, studying each of them in turn. The combat trial will take place in 3 days using the arena complex. You'll have access to the standard array of practice weapons and defensive gear. The scenario will be randomly selected to ensure fairness. After she left, Company 7 sat in their common area trying to process the magnitude of what they were facing. 36 opponents, all trained from childhood in advanced combat techniques. Representatives from some of the most martial species in the galaxy. We could still withdraw, suggested Val, claim that the rules were changed unfairly, and spend the next 4 years known as the company that backed down from a challenge, Shadow Walker Nix pointed out. Better than spending the next 4 years known as the company that got massacred in the arena, Echo Dancer Lyra observed. Stood up and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. Below, she could see cadets from various companies conducting evening exercises. Some were practicing with advanced energy weapons, others were engaged in hand-to-hand combat training, and a few were working on coordinated tactical maneuvers. We're going to lose, she said quietly. Probably, agreed Binary Thought. Definitely, corrected Windrider Talon. But continued, maybe losing isn't the point. She turned back to face her teammates. Everyone expects us to lose. The question is how we lose and what we prove in the process. Meaning, asked Stonebreaker. Meaning we use this opportunity to show them something they've never seen before. We don't fight to win. We fight to survive. We fight like humans. Over the next 3 days, Company 7 trained with an intensity that surprised even their instructors. But their approach was unconventional, focusing not on mastering advanced weapons or complex tactical formations, but on developing the kind of desperate, improvised fighting style that had served humanity during its darkest hours. Drew on everything her grandmother had taught her about survival warfare, how to use the environment as a weapon, how to turn your opponent's advantages against them, how to keep fighting when every rational analysis said you should give up. When the day of the combat trial arrived, the entire academy turned out to watch. The arena complex was packed with cadets, instructors, and even some visiting dignitaries who had heard about the unprecedented challenge. As Company 7 entered the arena, they were greeted by the sight of their opponents, 36 of the most impressive young warriors the galaxy had to offer. Warforged and his Titan collective teammates, their metallic skin gleaming under the arena lights. Captain Select and his Nova Confederacy allies moving with fluid precision. A squad of telepaths whose coordination was immediately apparent. The arena itself was a massive complex that could be reconfigured for different combat scenarios. Today's randomly selected scenario was urban warfare, contested city, with buildings, streets, and various obstacles creating a three-dimensional battlefield. As they took their positions, could hear the commentary from the observation decks. Most of it was speculation about how quickly Company 7 would be eliminated. Begin, announced the arena's automated system. And in that moment, as plasma fire began to light up the artificial cityscape, and Company 7 scattered according to their unconventional plan, smiled grimly. It was time to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. The plasma fire lit up the artificial cityscape like deadly fireworks. Company 7 scattered according to their plan, abandoning traditional formation tactics in favor of what had taught them over the past 3 days, survival warfare. Remember, S's voice crackled through their comm units as she dove behind a concrete barrier. We're not trying to win a conventional battle. We're trying to survive long enough to make them pay for every advantage they have. The coalition forces had immediately taken the high ground, establishing overlapping fields of fire from the tallest buildings in the arena. It was textbook tactical doctrine, exactly what any competent commander would do with superior numbers and firepower. Which was exactly what had been counting on. Val Windrider, you're up, she transmitted. Val activated his personal shield generator and sprinted across the open plaza, drawing fire from at least 12 different positions. His 4 arms allowed him to carry multiple smoke grenades, which he deployed as he ran, creating a thick cloud that interfered with the coalition's targeting systems. Meanwhile, Windrider Talon launched himself into the air, using his natural flight abilities to approach the tallest building from an unexpected angle. The coalition had positioned sentries to watch for aerial attacks, but they hadn't anticipated someone using the smoke screen as cover for a high-speed diving assault. The plasma fire that lit up Talon's position was intense but poorly coordinated. In their eagerness to eliminate the flying target, several coalition teams ended up crossing their fire lanes, forcing them to halt their attacks to avoid hitting their own people. Phase 1 complete, transmitted. They've revealed their positions, now we make them pay for grouping together. This was where her grandmother's lessons became crucial. During the resource wars, military doctrine had emphasized dispersed operations and mobility over concentrated firepower, when you were outnumbered and you couldn't afford to fight fair. Binary Thought, Echo Dancer, Stonebreaker, execute Chaos Pattern 7. The 3 cadets moved with practiced coordination, but not in any formation that would be recognized in standard military manuals. Binary Thought used his crystalline matrix to hack into the arena's environmental controls, triggering a localized power failure that plunged 2 city blocks into darkness. Echo Dancer began broadcasting a complex musical pattern that interfered with the coalition's communication systems, creating a feedback loop that made coordinated targeting nearly impossible. And Stonebreaker simply charged straight at the nearest building, using his massive strength to literally punch through the reinforced walls. The Coalition's response was immediate and overwhelming. Energy weapons lit up the darkness, seeking targets that were no longer where their tactical computers expected them to be. But in their eagerness to engage, they made a critical mistake that had been hopping for. They came down from their high-ground positions to pursue Company 7. Shadow Walker, Phantom-class protocol now. Nyx had been waiting in the shadows for exactly this moment. As the Coalition forces descended into the streets, she moved through the artificial cityscape like a ghost, using her natural invisibility to stay ahead of their tracking systems. But she wasn't trying to attack them directly. Instead, she was doing something far more devastating to a coordinated force. She was spreading false information. Using captured communication frequencies, Nyx began feeding the Coalition false position reports, phantom contact alerts, and contradictory movement orders. Within minutes, 3 different teams were converging on the same empty building while another squad was firing at shadows that didn't exist. Beautiful work, transmitted. Now for Phase 2. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for decades afterward. Instead of trying to match the Coalition's superior firepower with traditional tactics, Company 7 began fighting like cornered animals. They used the arena's infrastructure as weapons, turning maintenance tunnels into traps and loading docks into improvised fortifications. When Warforged and his Titan Collective teammates tried to clear a building using standard breach-and-clear tactics, they found themselves facing opponents who had rigged the entire structure with improvised explosive devices made from emergency flares and cleaning supplies. "This is not standard tactical doctrine," transmitted to his allies, his metallic frame showing scorch marks from multiple near misses. "No," replied Captain Select, who was currently pinned down by crossfire from 3 different positions that shouldn't have been able to maintain coordinated fields of fire. "It's something else entirely." The problem was that Company 7 wasn't fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like survivors. Every engagement was designed not to achieve tactical victory, but to extract maximum cost from the Coalition while preserving their own ability to keep fighting. When the telepaths tried to coordinate a flanking maneuver, they found their path blocked by Stonebreaker, who had somehow moved a massive piece of arena infrastructure into position as a barrier. When they tried to go around, Echo Dancer's musical interference made it impossible to maintain telepathic contact with their support teams. "They're not trying to win," observed Thoughtsinger Vex, one of the telepaths. "They're trying to make winning too expensive for us to afford." It was a remarkably accurate assessment. Had designed their entire strategy around the principle of asymmetric warfare. Make every victory costly, every advance dangerous, every tactical advantage a potential trap. But the Coalition had one decisive advantage that even couldn't overcome: numbers. For every Coalition soldier that Company 7 eliminated from the combat trial, there were 3 more to take their place. Slowly, methodically, they began to corner Company 7 in the arena's central plaza. "All units, this is," she transmitted as plasma fire intensified around their increasingly small perimeter. "We're approaching the final phase. Everyone ready?" The responses came back immediately. "Ready. Affirmative. Let's do this thing." "Remember," said, checking her weapon's charge level, "we're not trying to survive. We're trying to be remembered." What happened next became known as the Last Stand Protocols, a tactical concept that would eventually be integrated into Alliance military doctrine. Instead of surrendering when faced with impossible odds, Company 7 did something that no other species would have considered. They attacked. Not a desperate, hopeless charge, but a carefully coordinated assault designed to inflict maximum casualties while accepting their own inevitable defeat. It was tactical suicide, military madness, and absolutely terrifying to opponents who had been raised to believe that rational beings surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. Val and Windrider, Talon launched a diversionary attack on the Coalition's left flank, drawing fire and attention, while the rest of Company 7 prepared for the main assault. Binary Thought used his remaining power to overload several of the arena's energy distribution nodes, creating localized electromagnetic pulses that disabled advanced targeting systems. And then led the charge. She moved through the plasma fire like her grandmother had taught her, using cover and movement to stay ahead of the Coalition's targeting computers. But she wasn't trying to reach safety. She was trying to reach Warforged, the coalition's primary commander. Impossible, transmitted to his allies as he watched the small human figure weaving through deadly crossfire. No rational being would attempt this approach. She's not rational, replied Captain Select, who was desperately trying to coordinate a response. She's human. Reached position with her weapon almost depleted and her protective gear showing damage from multiple near misses. In any rational tactical analysis, she should have been eliminated from the combat trial minutes ago. But she was still fighting, still moving, still presenting a threat that had to be addressed. Surrender, commanded, his massive metallic frame towering over her. You have fought well, but this is over. No, replied, discarding her empty energy weapon and drawing her grandmother's combat knife. This is just getting started. What followed was not a duel in any traditional sense. It was a demonstration of the fundamental difference between human and non-human approaches to conflict. Fought with the precision and power of his species, using advanced combat algorithms and overwhelming physical advantages. Fought like an animal, using every dirty trick her grandmother had taught her about close-quarters survival. She couldn't match his strength, so she used his momentum against him. She couldn't penetrate his armor, so she attacked his sensor arrays and mobility systems. She couldn't outfight him, so she simply refused to be defeated. Why won't you surrender? Demanded as they grappled in the arena's central fountain, his systems showing damage from attacks that should not have been possible. Because, replied, jamming her knife into a joint in his armor plating, humans don't surrender. We just keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight with. The combat trial officially ended when the arena's automated systems determined that Company 7 had been eliminated. But as the smoke cleared and the lights came back up, something unprecedented had happened. The coalition had won, technically. They controlled the field, they had superior numbers, and they had achieved all their tactical objectives. But they had paid a price that no one had expected. Of the 36 coalition members who had entered the arena, only 18 were still combat effective at the end of the trial. Company 7 had been eliminated, but they had taken half the coalition with them. The silence in the observation decks was profound. Military instructors who had seen thousands of combat trials were staring at the results in disbelief. Cadets who had bet against Company 7 were quietly closing their wagering accounts. Attention all personnel, announced Commandant Therazine over the arena's public address system. The combat trial between Company 7 and the Coalition has concluded. Medical teams report no serious injuries, though several participants require extended time in regeneration chambers. He paused, and his optical sensors seemed to focus on the 12 members of Company 7 as they regrouped in the arena's center. This trial will require extensive analysis before we can determine its implications for Academy training protocols. All participants are to report for individual debriefing sessions beginning tomorrow morning. As they left the arena, Company 7 found themselves surrounded by cadets from other companies. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Instead of skepticism and hostility, there was something that had never expected to see directed at humans. Respect. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed, said a cadet whose telepathic abilities had allowed him to sense the emotional intensity of the final assault. You fought like you had nothing to lose. We didn't, Shadow Walker Nix replied simply. But that's exactly why we won, added. Warforged approached them as they reached the arena exit. His metallic frame showed visible damage from their encounter, and one of his optical sensors was functioning at reduced capacity. Human, he said formally, I owe you an apology. For what? For underestimating your species. I believed that human tactical thinking was simply chaotic, ineffective. I was wrong. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. You don't fight to win battles, you fight to survive wars. There is a difference, and it is significant. Captain Select joined them, his silver skin still showing scorch marks from the final assault. I've been analyzing your tactics throughout the trial. You never tried to match our advantages. Instead, you turned them into disadvantages. It's called asymmetric warfare, explained. When you can't fight fair, you fight smart. And when you can't fight smart, added Stonebreaker, flexing his massive arms, you fight mean. Over the following days, news of the combat trial spread throughout the Institute and beyond. The Academy's communication networks carried detailed analyses of Company 7's unconventional tactics. Military journals requested interviews. And most significantly, several members of the High Council arrived at Nexus Prime to observe Company 7's training firsthand. The debriefing sessions were extensive and detailed. Each member of Company 7 spent hours with Academy psychologists, tactical analysts, and military historians, explaining their decision-making process and strategic thinking. The most remarkable aspect, noted Professor Hivemind Collective Delta, is how quickly your species adapts tactical approaches to specific circumstances. Most civilizations develop standard doctrines and adhere to them consistently. Humans seem to modify their entire approach based on immediate needs. We're pragmatists, explained. We use whatever works. But this creates unpredictability that makes coordination with allied forces extremely difficult, pointed out Strategic Communications Professor Thoughtweaver. How can other species plan joint operations if they cannot predict human tactical responses? It was a fair question, and one that got to the heart of humanity's place in galactic civilization. Most species had evolved predictable patterns of behavior that made them reliable allies, but also made their responses easily anticipated by enemies. Maybe that's why you need us, suggested. Not because we're better fighters, but because we're unpredictable fighters. When your enemies can predict everyone else's responses, having allies they can't predict becomes valuable. The implications of this observation rippled through the Academy's teaching staff. For centuries, military doctrine had emphasized coordination, predictability, and standardized responses. The idea that unpredictability might be a strategic advantage was revolutionary. But it was during a joint training exercise 2 weeks later that the real significance of human tactical thinking became apparent. Company 7 was paired with Company 4 for a complex multi-phase operation against a simulated enemy force. Company 4 was composed entirely of cadets, known for their strategic brilliance and long-term planning abilities. The exercise was designed to be unwinnable. The simulated enemy had superior numbers, better positioning, and more advanced equipment. It was intended to test how well cadets performed under hopeless conditions, to see how they maintained morale and unit cohesion when facing certain defeat. Most companies approached these exercises as learning experiences, accepting defeat while trying to demonstrate competence and courage. But Company 7's approach was different. "We're not going to lose," announced during their planning session. "The parameters make victory mathematically impossible," observed Val, who had been working with Company 4's strategic analysts. "Even with perfect coordination and maximum efficiency, we cannot achieve the exercise objectives." "Then we change the objectives," replied. What followed was inhuman tactical thinking. Instead of accepting the exercise parameters as fixed constraints, Company 7 began treating them as variables that could be modified. They used the simulated environment's maintenance systems to create weapons that weren't part of the official equipment list. They recruited non-combatant personnel to serve as intelligence assets. They even convinced the exercise observers to modify their own positions by claiming safety concerns. "This is unprecedented," reported exercise controller sine wave conductor Hex, a harmonic collective being whose people specialized in large-scale coordination. "The human cadets are not following exercise protocols." "Are they violating any specific rules?" asked senior instructor Blue Maternal. "No, but they are interpreting the rules in ways that were never intended." "Then they are thinking tactically," concluded. "Continue the exercise." By the end of the operation, Company 7 and Company 4 had not only achieved their original objectives, but had also eliminated the simulated enemy force, secured 3 additional strategic positions, and established communication with a fictional resistance movement that existed only in background material. "How?" asked the lead strategist from Company 4. "The tactical computers confirmed that our mission was impossible with available resources." "We didn't use available resources," explained Binary Thought. "We created new resources." "And when that wasn't enough," added Echo Dancer Lyra, "we redefined what victory looked like." The exercise results caused a minor crisis among the Academy's teaching staff. For centuries, military exercises had been designed around the assumption that parameters were fixed and objectives were clear. The idea that students might modify both to achieve victory had never been considered. "They're not cheating," insisted Commandant Theraznine during an emergency faculty meeting. "They are thinking outside established frameworks." "But if students can arbitrarily redefine mission parameters," protested Professor Rigid Logic Constructor Prime, "how do we maintain any kind of standardized training criteria?" "Maybe," suggested Senior Instructor, "we need to reconsider our training criteria." This comment sparked a debate that would continue for months and eventually lead to significant changes in Alliance military doctrine. But for Company 7, the immediate result was recognition that their approach to tactical thinking was not just different but potentially valuable. Other companies began requesting joint training exercises with Company 7. Military instructors started incorporating adaptive scenario parameters into their lesson plans, and most significantly, several Alliance military units requested permission to observe Company 7's training methods. But with recognition came new challenges. As word of Company 7's unconventional success spread throughout the Institute, they found themselves facing expectations that were in some ways more difficult than the original skepticism. "Everyone wants to see what we'll do next," observed Windrider Talon during one of their evening discussions. "Like we're some kind of tactical entertainment." "It's better than them wanting to see us fail," Shadowwalker Nix pointed out. "Is it?" asked Val. "At least when they expected us to fail, we knew what we were proving. Now they expect us to be brilliant all the time." It was a fair concern. The pressure of constant observation was taking its toll on all of them. Every training exercise was now watched by dozens of observers. Every tactical decision was analyzed and discussed by Academy staff. Every mistake was scrutinized for what it revealed about human psychological patterns. "We need to remember something," said during one of their planning sessions. "We're not here to entertain anyone. We're here to prove that humans deserve a place in galactic civilization." "And how do we do that?" asked Stonebreaker. "By winning every exercise, by never making mistakes, by being perfect all the time." "No," replied, "by being human all the time, by showing them that our way of thinking has value even when it doesn't lead to perfect results." This philosophy was put to the test during their advanced xenobiology and tactical applications class. Professor Carapaceweaver, and being known for her analytical precision, had designed a scenario based on actual historical conflicts. "The Battle of Station," she announced, her mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "A classic example of superior tactics overcoming numerical disadvantage. The Third Fleet, outnumbered 3-1, achieved total victory through superior coordination and strategic planning." The holographic display showed the historical battle in detail. Every maneuver, every decision, every tactical choice that had led to the Alliance's victory against a powerful enemy force. "Your assignment," Professor continued, "is to analyze this battle and identify the key factors that determined its outcome. Focus on how proper military doctrine achieved victory despite apparent disadvantages." It was exactly the kind of analytical exercise that most cadets excelled at. Identify the successful strategies, understand why they worked, and learn to apply similar approaches in future situations. But as studied the battle data, something bothered her about the analysis. "This is wrong," she said during Company 7's study group that evening. "Wrong how?" asked Binary Thought. "The historical records are accurate. The Third Fleet did achieve victory against superior numbers." "The analysis is wrong," insisted. "Everyone's looking at this battle from the winner's perspective. But what about the losing side? What mistakes did they make that allowed a smaller force to defeat them?" It was a simple question that led to a complex investigation. Instead of focusing on the fleet's successful tactics, Company 7 began analyzing the enemy force's decision-making process, and what they found was disturbing. "They made every logical decision," reported Val after days of data analysis. "Every choice their commanders made was tactically sound according to standard military doctrine." "So how did they lose?" asked Windrider Talon. "Because," said slowly, "they were fighting an enemy that wasn't following standard military doctrine." Further investigation revealed the disturbing truth. The Third Fleet hadn't won through superior tactics. They had won because their enemy had been expecting them to fight conventionally, and they hadn't. They had used what could only be described as desperate measures. Kamikaze attacks, the deliberate sacrifice of entire squadrons to achieve minimal tactical gains, and the willingness to accept casualties that any rational commander would consider unacceptable. In other words, Shadowwalker Nix observed, they fought like humans. The implications were staggering. The battle that was taught as an example of superior alliance tactics was actually an example of the same kind of unconventional warfare that Company 7 had been demonstrating. "We need to present this to the class," decided. "Are you sure?" asked Echo Dancer Lyra. "Professor designed this exercise to teach us about proper military doctrine. If we prove that the historical example actually contradicts her lesson plan, then we'll be doing what humans do best," replied, challenging assumptions and asking uncomfortable questions. The next day, as Professor called for student presentations on the Battle of Station, Company 7 requested permission to present an alternative analysis. "Alternative how?" Professor asked, her compound eyes focusing on them with obvious skepticism. "We'd like to analyze the battle from the perspective of the losing side," explained, "to understand how superior numbers and positioning could be overcome by inferior forces. The lesson plan clearly states that you should focus on successful alliance tactics," Professor pointed out. "With respect, Professor, we think the most important lesson might be why those tactics were successful." What followed was a presentation that challenged everything the class had been taught about the battle. Using detailed tactical analysis, Company 7 demonstrated that the enemy force had been defeated not by superior alliance strategy, but by their inability to respond to tactics that violated conventional military doctrine. "The Third Fleet won," concluded, "because they were willing to make choices that no rational commander would make. They accepted losses that should have been unacceptable in order to achieve goals that should have been impossible." The silence in the classroom was profound. Professor's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed the implications of what she had just heard. "Are you suggesting," she said carefully, "that proper military doctrine can be a disadvantage in certain circumstances?" "We're suggesting," replied Binary Thought, "that predictable military doctrine can be exploited by enemies who are willing to be unpredictable." The presentation sparked a debate that continued for weeks and eventually reached the highest levels of Alliance command structure. Military historians began re-examining other, classic, victories to see if similar patterns could be identified. Strategic planners started considering how to incorporate unpredictability into Alliance tactical doctrine without sacrificing coordination and effectiveness. But for Company 7, the most immediate result was recognition from their instructors that their approach to tactical analysis was not just different but potentially revolutionary. "You have identified a significant gap in our current tactical education," Professor admitted after reviewing their analysis. "The assumption that superior doctrine leads to inevitable victory may be incomplete." As their first year at the Institute continued, Company 7 found themselves increasingly integrated into the Academy's broader community. The initial hostility and skepticism had largely faded, replaced by curiosity and respect. Other cadets sought them out for advice on unconventional tactical problems. Instructors included their perspectives in lesson plans and strategic discussions. But the most significant change was in how they saw themselves and their mission. They were no longer trying to prove that humans deserved a place in galactic civilization. They were demonstrating what humans could contribute to galactic civilization. "We're not just representing Earth anymore," observed Windrider Talon during one of their evening discussions. "We're representing a different way of thinking about problems." "A human way," added Stonebreaker. "Which might be exactly what the galaxy needs," concluded. As their first year at the Galactic Defense Institute drew to a close, Company 7 had achieved something that no one, including themselves, had thought possible. They had not just survived in an environment designed for alien species. They had thrived, contributing new perspectives and approaches that were already beginning to influence how the Alliance thought about military strategy. But their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The advanced courses in their second year would test not just their tactical abilities, but their capacity to work with other species on complex, long-term strategic problems. They would face scenarios designed to push even the most capable cadets to their limits. And somewhere in the galaxy, there were forces watching their progress with interest. Forces that saw humanity's unpredictability not as an asset to be cultivated, but as a threat to be eliminated. The attack came during the third week of their second year, in the depths of Nexus Prime's artificial night cycle. Was in the Academy's Advanced Tactical Simulation Lab when the emergency alerts began screaming through the Institute's communication systems. All cadets to secure positions. This is not a drill. Unknown hostiles have breached Academy defenses. All cadets to secure positions immediately. The lights in the simulation lab shifted to emergency amber as blast shields automatically sealed the windows. Around her, holographic tactical displays flickered and died as the Academy's defensive systems redirected power to more critical functions. Val's voice crackled through her comm unit. "Where are you?" "Simulation Lab 7, she replied, moving toward the exit. "What's the situation?" "Unknown, Company 7 is being ordered to Tower 7's secure levels. Emergency protocols are in effect." But as reached the corridor, something felt wrong. The emergency lighting was functional, the blast shields were in place, but the Academy's automated defense systems weren't active. For a facility designed to train the galaxy's elite military officers, the response to a hostile breach seemed surprisingly restrained. Her grandmother's lessons echoed in her mind. When something doesn't make sense, assume it's a trap. "Val, hold position," she transmitted. "Something's not right about this." "What do you mean?" "The emergency response is too limited. If we were really under attack, the Academy's automated defense systems would be fully active. Instead, it looks like they're only sealing areas and moving personnel." As she spoke, heard footsteps in the corridor outside the simulation lab. Multiple beings moving with military precision, but trying to be quiet about it. That wasn't consistent with either rescue operations or defensive responses. "Company 7, this is. I think we're being hunted." The response was immediate and alarmed. "Hunted by whom?" asked Shadow Walker Nix. "Unknown, but I don't think this is an external attack. I think someone inside the Academy is targeting us specifically." It was a paranoid conclusion, but as reviewed the evidence, it made disturbing sense. The timing of the attack, during a period when most cadets would be scattered throughout the Academy. The limited defensive response, suggesting that whoever was behind this had access to Academy security systems, and the specific evacuation orders that would separate Company 7 from other cadets and instructors. "If you're right," transmitted Windrider Talon, "then heading to Tower 7's secure levels would be exactly what they want us to do." "Agreed. Everyone stay where you are and go dark. No communications unless absolutely necessary." Disabled her comm unit's automatic tracking systems and began moving through the Academy's maintenance corridors. Her grandmother had taught her that the best way to avoid a trap was to go where your enemies didn't expect you to be. The maintenance areas of the Galactic Defense Institute were a maze of service tunnels, equipment rooms, and automated systems designed to keep the massive facility functional. They were also largely unmonitored, since few beings had any reason to be there during normal operations. As she moved through the tunnels, began to piece together what was happening. The attack on the Academy wasn't random. Someone had specifically targeted Company 7, using what appeared to be an external threat to justify actions that would otherwise be considered hostile. But who and why? Her question was answered when she reached a service junction near Tower 7 and heard voices echoing through the ventilation system. "The human is not in her quarters," a voice was saying, "nor are any of her teammates." "They must be hiding somewhere in the Academy," replied another voice, this one with the harmonic resonance of a Titan collective being. "Continue the search. They cannot evade us indefinitely." "This operation is already taking too long," said a third voice, clearly from the telepathic undertones. "If Academy security discovers what we are doing." "Academy security will assume this is part of the external attack," the first voice replied. "As long as we eliminate the targets before the all-clear is given, our actions will be attributed to the unknown hostiles." Felt her blood turn cold. This wasn't just an attack on Company 7. It was an assassination attempt disguised as part of a larger incident. She activated her comm unit long enough to send a brief, coded message to her teammates. "Verify identity before trusting anyone. Hostile forces inside Academy. Assume all official communications compromised. Then she began moving through the maintenance tunnels with grim purpose. If someone wanted to hunt Company 7, they were about to learn what humans were capable of when pushed into a corner. Her first objective was to reach the Academy's main communication center and establish contact with legitimate Academy security. But as she approached the communications facility, she found her path blocked by two beings in Academy security uniforms who were clearly not Academy personnel. The first was a Saurian whose scales showed the distinctive scarring patterns of professional military service. The second was an ethereal whose telepathic emanations felt wrong, aggressive in a way that was completely uncharacteristic of the species. "Unknown cadet," the Saurian called out as they spotted her. "You are ordered to report to secure holding areas immediately." "Acknowledged," replied, moving closer with her hands visible and empty. "Which secure area am I assigned to?" "Tower 7-3, the ethereal said, but there was something in his mental emanations that confirmed suspicions. These weren't Academy security personnel, they were the hunters. When she was close enough, moved with the speed and precision her grandmother had taught her. The Saurian's weapon was still holstered when she struck him in the throat with a nerve strike that temporarily paralyzed his vocal cords. The ethereal tried to use his telepathic abilities to disorient her, but had trained extensively in mental resistance techniques. 2 minutes later, both fake security officers were unconscious and secured with their own restraint devices, appropriated their communication equipment, and began monitoring their network traffic. What she discovered was even worse than she had suspected. "Phoenix Base, this is Hunter Team Alpha," a voice was reporting. "Targets have gone to ground, requesting permission to expand search parameters." "Negative, Hunter Team Alpha. Maintain low profile until extraction window opens. Remember, this operation never happened." Phoenix Base had heard that designation before during her strategic communications classes. It was the code name for a faction within the Alliance military that advocated for strict species purity policies. They believed that allowing chaotic species like humans into the galactic community was a strategic mistake that would eventually lead to the collapse of civilized space. And apparently, they were willing to commit murder to prevent that outcome. Using the captured communication equipment, began tracking the positions of other hunter teams throughout the Academy. There were at least 6 teams, all equipped with Academy security credentials and all hunting for Company 7. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that Company 7 would respond to the crisis like any other Academy cadets, following evacuation procedures, trusting authority figures, and waiting for rescue. Instead, Company 7 was about to demonstrate why humans had survived on a quarantined world for 50 years. "All Company 7 members," transmitted on their secure frequency, "this is with a tactical update. We are facing approximately 24 hostile operatives disguised as Academy security. Their objective is our elimination, disguised as casualties from an external attack." The responses came back immediately, angry and determined. "Orders?" asked Stonebreaker. "We hunt the hunters," replied. What followed was in guerrilla warfare conducted within the halls of the galaxy's most prestigious military academy. Company 7 used every lesson they had learned about unconventional tactics, turning the Academy's own infrastructure against their attackers. Binary thought hacked into the Academy's environmental systems, creating localized power failures that left the hunter teams operating in darkness, while Company 7 used emergency lighting systems to maintain visibility. Echo Dancer Lyra used the Academy's public address system to broadcast false evacuation orders that sent the hunters chasing phantom targets. Shadowwalker Nyx did what she did best, moving through the Academy like a ghost and gathering intelligence on the hunters' positions and capabilities. And when the opportunity presented itself, she began eliminating them one by one. "Target down," she reported after her third successful ambush. "Hunter Team Delta is now operating at half strength." But the hunters were professional military operatives, not Academy cadets. They adapted quickly to Company 7's tactics, coordinating their response and forcing the human team into increasingly desperate situations. "They're good," admitted Windrider Talon after a close escape from Hunter Team Beta. "Better than most of the opposition we've faced in training." They're Phoenix base operatives, explained over their secure comm channel. Military extremists who believe humans are too dangerous to be allowed into galactic civilization. Well, said Val grimly, let's prove them wrong. The turning point came when Stonebreaker encountered Hunter Team Alpha in the Academy's main gymnasium. The team had been using the facility as a staging area, confident that its size and multiple exits would allow them to control any engagement. They hadn't counted on facing a Goliath-class warrior who was fighting mad. "You want to eliminate Company 7?" transmitted as he charged into the gymnasium. "You'll have to go through me first." What followed was not a tactical engagement, but a demonstration of raw physical power. Used his massive strength to turn the gymnasium's exercise equipment into improvised weapons, hurling weights and machinery at his attackers while closing to hand-to-hand range. The Hunter Team Alpha operatives were skilled professionals, but they weren't prepared to fight someone who treated a combat engagement like a berserker rage. Within minutes, the entire team was down and was standing over their unconscious forms with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Hunter Team Alpha eliminated," he reported. "I may have gotten a little carried away." "Good work," replied. All teams were shifting to Phase 2, time to take this fight to their command structure. Using intelligence gathered from captured Hunter team communications, Company 7 began tracking the location of Phoenix Base's command element. The tactical coordination of the Hunter teams suggested a central command post somewhere within the Academy, hidden among legitimate security operations. They found it in the Academy's main security center, where 3 Phoenix Base operatives had taken control of the facility's surveillance systems and were coordinating the hunt for Company 7. But when Company 7 arrived to confront them, they found something unexpected. The security center was already under siege. "What the hell?" muttered Shadow Walker Nix as they observed the situation from concealment. "Who else is fighting them?" The answer became clear when they saw Commandant Therazine and a team of legitimate Academy security personnel forcing their way into the security center. The optical sensors were glowing with what could only be described as electronic fury. "Phoenix Base operatives," the Commandant was announcing through amplified speakers, "you are in violation of Alliance military law and Academy regulations. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." The response was immediate weapons fire, as the Phoenix Base command team chose to fight rather than surrender. "Orders?" asked Val. Watched the firefight for a moment, then made her decision. "We help the Commandant. Our enemy's enemy is our ally." Company 7's intervention in the security center battle was decisive. While the Phoenix Base operatives were focused on Academy security forces attacking from the main entrance, Company 7 struck from the maintenance areas, using their knowledge of unconventional tactics to outflank and eliminate the remaining hunters. When the shooting stopped, Commandant Therazine stood in the center of the security center, surveying the unconscious Phoenix Base operatives with obvious satisfaction. "Company 7, he said, his optical sensors focusing on them with what might have been approval. "Report." "Sir," replied, "we encountered approximately 24 hostile operatives disguised as Academy security personnel. They were attempting to eliminate Company 7 under cover of a simulated external attack." "And their current status?" "All hostile operatives have been neutralized and secured, sir." The Commandant processed this information for several seconds, his artificial intelligence calculating implications and consequences. "Company 7, he said finally, "you have demonstrated tactical excellence under extreme conditions. Your response to this crisis will be noted in your permanent records." Over the following days, the full scope of the Phoenix Base operation became clear. The external attack on the Academy had been entirely fabricated, using stolen security codes and threat reports to justify the activation of emergency protocols. During the confusion, Phoenix Base operatives had planned to eliminate Company 7 and claim their deaths were casualties of the fake attack. But they had underestimated both Company 7's capabilities and the Academy's commitment to protecting its students. 27 Phoenix Base operatives have been taken into custody, reported Senior Instructor Blue Maternal during a classified briefing. They will face charges including conspiracy, attempted murder, and violations of Alliance military law. "What about their political objectives?" asked Professor Thoughtweaver. Phoenix Base represents a significant faction within Alliance military circles. Their political objectives, said Commandant Theras-9, have been significantly undermined by Company 7's performance during this incident. He activated a holographic display showing tactical analysis of the night's events. Company 7 faced 24 professional,